and welcome to a special remap interview conversation. I'm not sure what I'm calling this. In a panic, when Rob hurt his leg, I'm like, I'm gonna just pull a ripcord on a bunch of podcast ideas that I've been kicking around, and I am a huge fan, not just of Kat Bailey, but of Kat Bailey's new newsletter on Nintenkats. Kat is a longtime games writer, journalist who I've crossed paths with many times over the years, has been on remap material in the past, mostly talking about the Minnesota Vikings. She is the co-host of the RPG podcast, Axe of the Blood God, which, like so many things these days, Nintenkats including, if you like it, please go and support it, and you put your money where your interests are to make all this stuff work. Kat, thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Patrick. I mean, what's your optimism levels for the Bears right now? Just checking in.
It's funny. In theory, they had a really good offseason to set themselves up for a bunch of success, but I am at the position with the Chicago Bears, despite the fact that, like, if I go to sip my coffee, it is a Bears oh gosh, coffee mug. It's in the basement. Not because I think they're going to be poor, but I think I'm at the position with that professional sports team where I will believe it when I see it. And part of what I'm envious about with where you're at with the Minnesota Vikings is, especially given, I know the end of last season was nightmarish and unfortunate, but like, you have a coach and an infrastructure that seems to suggest in unideal circumstances, like, they will just find a way to at the very least be competent and fun. And I can't, like, is your team going to the Super Bowl? Buddy, I would just like to have an 8-8 season, or I guess it's 8-9 these days, an 8-9 season where occasionally I can be like, boy, I think I'm going to have some fun tonight in front of the old television. So that's where I'm at, is just, I'd love for them to not trip over themselves and become a laughingstock multiple times, which is what happened last season. So that's currently where my head's at.
I'm rooting for you.
Thank you. You know what? I appreciate that. And hey, look, ideally, like, the NFC North is like a total bloodbath. Like, JJ McCarthy.
No Packers, no Lions.
Yes,
that's all I'm asking. Sorry,
exactly.
Lions fans. You're the heel now.
I guess the Lions have us. I was really rooting for them. I was fine with them going to the Super Bowl. In fact, I would have rooted for them if they went all the way to the Super Bowl. I'd be like, you know what? This fan base deserves it. But now Ben Johnson is our coach, and I'm out for blood. So now I want them to lose. Not as much as I want the Packers to lose, but I do want them to lose. So, as always, we are a reader-supported show and website. If you enjoy Remap Radio and wish to become a supporter, you can learn more at remapradio.com/sign up. Or just click the orange button in the upper right-hand corner of the website. Our subscribers let us keep doing the shows, the streams, and articles that define Remap. So, the reason I wanted to chat with you, specifically Kat, was inspired by how much I've been enjoying Nintenkats, which is a newsletter that people can subscribe to now. Where would be the best place to point people towards?
I mean, literally go to my Blue Sky, Kat Bailey, and look at the pinned message, because it's Nintenkats with a K, .beehive, spelled not like beehive. It's BEEHIIV.com, Nintenkats.beehive.com. As confusing as possible. So it's easier to just go click the link on my Blue Sky, and you can find it right there.
Well, I highly recommend it. I think Kat is very thoughtful and insightful about Nintendo, which is a company that I think a lot about and have been thinking a lot about. And the reason I wanted to chat with you is because, you know, given everything that's happened with Microsoft lately, between what is Xbox as a platform, as a brand, like, what does that division represent in the company, and it's like its corporate initiatives, Nintendo having just launched the Switch 2, like, we're about, a month and a half out from that. We have its first, like, I mean, I guess Mario Kart World was a big deal to a lot of people, but really the Switch 2 started for me with the launch of Donkey Kong Bananza. It just feels like there's a lot of transition pivot moments happening in video games right now, and I wanted to sort of reach out to different folks who have kind of an expertise and interest in a lot of these different companies and sort of talk to them about, like, where are we at? How do we feel about them? And you were the one who came to mind to talk about Nintendo. So I guess that's kind of where I wanted to start, because I think these two things overlap. Why did you want to start the newsletter Nintenkats? And why do you find the company interesting enough that you wanted to dedicate that much time, space, and effort to thinking through what they're doing?
Banana. That's why.
It's all banana.
Oh, banana. Patrick, did you grow up playing Nintendo? Was that a thing for you?
I did.
What were you playing?
Yes. No,
Okay.
yes, I was Nintendo, and then had the one friend who had a Genesis, and we made fun of him. But then Mortal Kombat came out, and there was blood in it, and then he got to make fun of us, and then we went back to bullying him for having a Genesis, which was purely just because, frankly, I think it's how a lot of kids ended up with a Genesis over a Nintendo. Was not, like, oh, I don't know, like he said he wanted a video game system, so we went and got him one. What's the difference between the two of these?
It's hard for me to romanticize Nintendo because it's a very complicated and very old company. But as as a video game history appreciator and someone who I think really, really likes craft and really likes art, Nintendo really gets me. They consistently make they have really interesting ideas within their individual franchises. And if you look at Nintendo, it's just a place to work. I can imagine it's very frustrating, actually. I did a report on them some years ago, and I got the impression of a company that doesn't pay super well, that is really insular and hard to get into, that is very strict, that when you are trying to present new ideas to them, they go, "What? Why would you do that? Podcasts?" I had people go, "Yeah, they didn't really believe in podcasts because they didn't consider it a visual medium." I'm like, "Well, I'm literally on video right now. It's a thing." But
just a total side note, like when you're trying to work with Nintendo for things like access to like early copies of the game, like what you end up hearing through the grapevine is like, we don't all the ways that media now uses to communicate with their audiences is something that Nintendo fundamentally does not exist. Like does not exist to them. It's very strange.
Yeah. On the flip side, they're a company where people like Eiji Aonuma and Shigeru Miyamoto have managed to stick around for basically their entire careers. And I think it reflects in the quality of their games. We're looking at the games industry right now, and there's frankly a huge brain drain and a talent drain from all the people who are getting laid off who are going, "Why am I bothering with this? I'm going to go on to other things. I'm going to get paid actual money and not have to work nearly as hard." I know people, for example, who've gone from, Blizzard to Netflix because why bother? Why bother with the hassle when I can get paid literally 3x what I was getting paid at Blizzard? And that's sad to me as a person who enjoys video games. Whereas Nintendo, they just don't really do that. And there's a really famous story about Satoru Iwata deciding to take a pay cut rather than enact layoffs and saying it's just like fundamentally he doesn't really believe in them. And I'm kind of the same way, if I'm being totally honest. And then just as a person who enjoys video games, it really fits to my tastes. I love Metroid, I love Mario, I love Pokemon. I love the aesthetic of Nintendo games. I really, really love Zelda. The Switch is probably my favorite console of all time. So when it came time to start a newsletter, I didn't necessarily want to do RPGs again because that's been like my thing for basically my entire career. Mm-hmm. So it felt like Nintendo was kind of a no-brainer for me.
Yeah, I think part of my own personal continued interest in Nintendo aligns pretty closely to a lot of what you talk about, both in terms of like professionally being interested in how they sort of conduct themselves, having sort of an interest and a respect in sort of the like institution and like formality of video games, and like wanting to pass on knowledge and experience and mentoring folks to understand how things are made. Like, again, that doesn't excuse sort of a culture that might exploit people in the process, but nonetheless, it does seem to be like understanding natural historical transition seems to be something the company thinks about in a way that is more medium and long term, in a way that most of the video games industry is very short term, chasing trends, chasing monetary strategies. And Nintendo, for all they are knocked for, boy, they don't understand how the internet works and other things. In some ways, like, damn, it's great that they don't understand like how the internet works. So sometimes it seems to have worked to their advantage to have been such slow movers on things like that, or not so quickly wrapping the company around whatever the trend is that the rest of the industry is chasing. But also, it's just fundamentally like the types of games that I grew up with, whose sort of like core mechanics and verbs and forms of interaction are ultimately the stuff that I still just enjoy doing the most in a video game. And broadly, the industry is moving away from that in so many different ways, which is normal to get older, and they make things for different generations. But like playing Donkey Kong Bananza, a game that is not much of a pure platformer, and that's like something I would like to get into you with about Nintendo's own approach to the platformer, sort of the genre that defines the company. But I think the kinds of platformers they make these days are pretty fundamentally different in approach. And what like my otherwise regular experience with a platformer, which is Roblox with my children. They're called obbies in Roblox, which is just a shorthand for obstacle course. And in an obby in Roblox, they're pure platforming sequences. They're you navigating a space and using the physics. But it is awful to control. It is a nightmare. It is clear that like nobody actually considers what this feels like. Does it feel good? There is no artistry to it. It's like a deeply commercialized, exploitative space. My children are also, completely obsessed with it, and so I try to recognize and balance those things. But Nintendo,
does that feel weird to you?
Yes,
Do you have mixed feelings about it? Because I'm hearing mixed feelings.
I do. Look, part of parenting is reconciling like what you think might be healthier for your children and what they just happen to be interested in. And so I try to playing Roblox is me trying to understand where the kids are at, but also exposing them.
Where are the kids? Oh,
they are
really ugly video games.
They're in really ugly video games. There's some interesting stuff. That's a whole Roblox design philosophy. Their design language is social as opposed to like mechanical. And so the fact that Roblox has really floaty physics and doesn't play well is by design. Like it's like as a platform, its audience is fundamentally uninterested or seems to be fundamentally uninterested in that being the motivator for playing a video game. And it's actually the social mechanics that drive a lot of the interactions that make them excited to be in those spaces. Whereas Nintendo, like they just, yes, they've changed over the years. They've made different types of games, but like you can see Super Mario Brothers to Donkey Kong Bananza and like can draw. It's a line that, ebbs and flows and changes, but like there's a through line between how they started for a lot, at least, how that company is introduced into my life, your life, a lot of people's lives, and where they're at now. And you can see, I kind of understand how they got from there to there just by looking at those two games. And that is just not true of so much in video games. And I think that's why I continue to have such a special place in my heart for the company. Why I found myself so interested in them is because I think it's part of that through line. Like how many things in your life, especially your main hobby, like you can say like, I've experienced the whole arc of it. And like Nintendo is one of those rare instances where I can say I've experienced the whole arc.
Yeah, I've been there pretty much from the beginning with Nintendo, and I think that's one of the things that I think is really cool about them is that they're deeply ingrained in the history of the medium. I mean, if they didn't save home consoles in North America, at the very least, they defined them in the 1980s at a time when, home consoles were literally in bargain bins because they had been flooding the market with, kind of cheap garbage, if I'm being totally honest. And they brought a very different outlook and also a very aggressive outlook with their licensing practices. You don't want to leave that part out. But and there have been so many times where they've defied conventional wisdom to their profit, where people say, well, video games are going this way, and Nintendo's a dinosaur because they're not making a Pokemon MMORPG. But people didn't understand that actually Pokemon was already a social game, and Nintendo was way ahead of the curve on that front before people even really understood what having a true social game necessarily meant in a mainstream context. And then again, with motion controls and going in a much more blue ocean casual approach, which Xbox tried to copy to their detriment. And then again with dedicated handhelds. Nobody thought dedicated handhelds were going to be successful in an era of mobile gaming. They're like, no, the Nintendo Switch. That's our next move. And now everybody wants to make their own dedicated handheld. So often they've been surprisingly ahead of the curve for such a conservative company. On the other hand, I also think that they are starting to get a little set in their ways or getting a little backward facing rather than forward facing. And that's the thing that I would worry about. And for as rich and wonderful and delightful as Donkey Kong is, in some ways, I think it is emblematic of that.
expand on that. What do you mean by how that game represents kind of maybe some of your more existential worries about what this company is over the next like 5-10 years?
Donkey Kong is a branding exercise to bring back Donkey Kong as a character and get it fresh life. And why do they want to give Donkey Kong fresh life, Patrick? It's because they want to make movies.
Yeah, so I think that was one of like when that, a new Donkey Kong movie hasn't formally been announced. Maybe something like that happens in between like us recording this and this podcast being released. But as of this recording, yes, there was people pulled up a trademark showing that Universal and Nintendo seem to be trending in the direction of doing a Donkey Kong film. And perhaps that's not necessarily the motivation for why Donkey Kong Bananza was greenlit as a game in the first place. But for as much as Nintendo is sort of dinged for like, what is the broader strategy? How do all these things line up? You look at Sony and the way that a lot of their business model going forward is building properties that exist across different mediums, places in games and reality all at once, lined up with television shows and movies. Nintendo seems to have pretty quickly, by Nintendo standards, moved into a direction where you start to feel like that's where they want to be in the next 5 years. And that sort of like rigidity and like lining up of corporate interests to have like synergy between those things, I'm with you with like that is I don't know, that gives me the willies, I guess, because that's just so ahistorical to how Nintendo has operated in the past, which is a company that focuses on what they're good at. Like they make video games and stuff orbits around that, but their insular nature, that seems to be something they are frankly pushing against. And I don't know when Miyamoto will be gone, right? Like by choice of retirement or, if events sort of take over, but that seems to be where like the company is going to be left when like the company that built this, like made the Nintendo in our memories and our hearts, the version of that company that's handed over is one that feels very much like line these characters up with all the synergies happening elsewhere. And that doesn't mean they won't make good video games along the way, but it is a fundamentally different company.
Yes. They are starting to think of themselves as a franchise. Well, they've always thought of themselves as a character company, but they understand now how strong and how powerful their characters are in this day and age. So many other companies would kill for what Nintendo has. And probably because of how important Donkey Kong is to Nintendo's history and because it's near and dear to Miyamoto's heart, they really want to make Donkey Kong work. And it goes back to the Mario movie that came out a couple years ago. They were very deliberate about making sure Donkey Kong was a big part of that movie.
Yes.
So that they could set it up down the line. I think they were already making this game. They were already thinking about the next step for the amusement park. And they were like, Donkey Kong has to be important. And, well, here we are. And not a lot of companies could actually make that work. Plenty of companies have said, this character is going to be a big deal. You got to have the game to back it up. And to Nintendo EAD's credit, they made the game. It's great. Very clever. Physical comedy, off the charts. It's a laugh a minute, seriously, with the way Donkey Kong or DK is interacting with the camera, mugging for the camera. Just little moments like when he's punching upward, he's like, it's so full of life and personality in a way that you just can't easily replicate. And it speaks to the level of creative talent that is still there at Nintendo making this stuff. But underneath it all, I don't want to romanticize it, but 10 years ago, Satoru Iwata died, and Satoru Iwata had a very specific vision, and it was very experiences focused, I think. And that's how we ended up with things like the DS and the Wii and the Nintendo Switch. And at his heart, he was a programmer, and he liked video games. And the person who's currently in charge now, Furukawa, he's a marketing guy. He's a guy, I would just, please don't get upset with me for this comparison, but this is the comparison that always comes to mind. Iwata, Steve Jobs. Sorry, that's like not flattering to Iwata, but that's where I come from.
Mm-hmm.
Steve Jobs is a marketing guy, but whatever.
I know what you're saying.
And Furukawa is Tim Cook. And Tim Cook, what was Tim Cook guy? He was a logistics guy. And he looked at Apple very logically and said, okay, brick by brick, we're going to build this up. And now what's the result? Apple has been historically more successful than ever, but not necessarily explosively innovative like Apple was under Steve Jobs. And with Nintendo, you're saying the same thing with Furukawa. Not necessarily explosively innovative. I think the Switch 2 is a perfect example of that, but also maybe more logical, maybe more willing to follow common traditional wisdom, common wisdom. And that's maybe why people are kind of going, I don't know, like what Nintendo feels different now. I think that's why.
Sorry, give me 1 second to open a window. It got much hotter in here. Last thing I need to do is pass out in the middle of my
Please don't pass out. I shut
the window and I thought it'd be fine, and then it turns out it was not fine. So I think part of what you're getting at, part of the appeal of Nintendo is, like, I think some people could look at the things like the Wii U. It's like, wow, like what a bust, and I can't believe they did that. I look at the Wii U and go, wow, what a bust. I'm glad like they're willing to fail. And I do think, you know, this is kind of something we can't really test out without like a longer period of history. Like essentially knowing what happens after the Switch 2 is like the Switch 1 so successful that like there's just no reason, even if you're an unconventional take a swing for the fences company, like you just can't do anything but just make a more powerful Switch. And I think that's like, that would be absolutely reasonable. And like the optimistics take on that is you are conservative and cynical about the hardware evolution, and then let's put all the resources and effort into being like out there on the software side, like to take real swings there. And you know, I think that's the optimist take on like where the Switch 2 could be, you know, like over the next 5 years. At the same time, like some of the patterns that you're identifying was sort of like lining up traditional corporate like synergies in media, the kind of like corporate partnerships they're taking these days into theme parks and the films, certainly would suggest that the more conservative approach going forward of like really leaning on some of these core characters, expanding out the bench a little bit. But boy, that really seems like you could, if you wanted to take the cynical side of it, the kinds of games that you would approve, the kinds of games that you would make, how different those deviated from the past, taking the kinds of swings that can lead to a flop. Like, the Wii U flops so the Switch 2 can run. Like that is the nature, I think, of Nintendo and many of their, quote, strange sort of experiments in the past is like those were necessary experiments. Failures in the market, but that doesn't mean like a failure as a creative enterprise. And I worry with you that maybe some of that is going to be gone from the company in the future. Maybe it's a more sustainable company. Maybe it's a healthier company in the sense that in the Tim Cook Apple sense of like it's got like better profits, it's a bigger company, it's more reliable. But that boom bust cycle that Nintendo has gone through, if you know, like you and I, like being of similar ages, like I watched like even the GameCube, like a bust. Incredible games, like such like wild experimentation, even in like a really boring hardware format. Like, is that version of the company going to disappear in the appearance of a company that is more like fiscally stable, but more creatively, maybe not inert, but I don't know, less of a risk taker than it's been in the past?
What's funny is back in those days, the Nintendo 64 and GameCube, you forget, were meant to be powerful hardware.
Yes.
And that was Hiroshi Yamauchi still steering the ship. I think Iwata took over in maybe 2002, and the GameCube was well underway in development around by that. It was out by 2001. Okay, sorry, I'm just mentally figuring out the timeline here. Nintendo took a lot of lessons from the GameCube. And one of the big lessons was we can't go toe-to-toe with Xbox and PlayStation. We have to go for the blue ocean. We have to rise to heaven or sink to hell, as Iwata said with the DS. And that's exactly what they did. And now we're moving into a different era. The thing that's I've been thinking about, I don't want to be too harsh on the Switch 2, because I also think that video games have changed a lot. It was a very boom and bust cycle for video games in the 2000s as well. Games were changing so fast. Graphics were evolving so fast. Gameplay experiences online came into play in 2003 for home consoles. Yes, I know it was on the Dreamcast. Don't at me. And
I was there for Phantasy Star Online
hey,
as well. I
love the Dreamcast. I was playing NFL 2K, okay?
back when sports games were real.
Yeah, exactly. And fast forward to 2025, and you can feel the video games industry starting to calcify. And not to its benefit. Graphics are calcifying. Experiences are calcifying. Companies are much less willing to take big swings. The technology has kind of hit into a very stable state, and there might just be less room for innovation. And for a company like Nintendo, maybe you just go, okay, well, then it's about the characters. It's about the experiences. So we will choose to innovate within that context. And how do we keep growing? We grow through amusement parks and movies, and we play into our history. I think that's a very sound strategy. I'm not going to say that they're evil or cynical for doing that. It's probably what I would do. It's probably what I would recommend, if I'm being totally honest. I think if we're mourning the loss of a spark of brilliance with Nintendo, maybe we are mourning the loss of a spark of brilliance in the games industry, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could easily, I mean, video games are more expensive than ever to make. They take longer than ever to make. Even Nintendo has, acknowledged, and I think in a recent shareholder exchange, yes, even our development budgets are going up, because even though they're on, very conservative hardware, which in theory limits the cost of making the games, it still takes such a long time to build them, even at the scale, pace, and hardware profile that Nintendo, they're just climbing it further back, but they're climbing it nonetheless. And I think you're right that these may be, I guess if you want to look at it a certain way, it is Nintendo responding to broad industry trends in which you could look at this as loss of a spark. You could also look at it what has Nintendo historically done over the decades? They survive. What does everyone else do? Not survive, or go through such, and so
yeah.
Do you survive long enough that you can take the swing later? And part of what I wonder, maybe this is an unfair way to characterize it, but I've followed Apple stuff pretty closely over the years, and something that'll come up during the Tim Cook era a lot, even though the company's made tons of money, is if Steve Jobs was still alive, what would he have done? And it obviously would have been a different company. How different? Impossible to say. It's not something that you can sort of...
They wouldn't have made a stylus.
I think that is probably right. But I wonder, I think, you wrote a really, beautiful post recently in Nintenkats, looking back on Iwata and looking up some of the interviews and some of his history. I do wonder, in that recent reflection, do you have anything that kind of comes to mind, if Iwata was still around, to what extent do you think the Switch 2 would be fundamentally different than the machine that we got in early June?
If Satoru Iwata were still the CEO of Nintendo today, I don't think the Switch 2 would have the equivalent of Discord baked in with a camera. I think we would have had something else.
Mm-hmm.
And we would have said, what is this goofy thing? What is going on? I think the Switch 2 itself wouldn't have been actually that different.
Uh-huh.
I think the technology under the hood might have been different. I can only speculate, honestly. It's interesting to look at the Switch 2 because there's actually a lot of interesting things happening with it, between the way it handles DLSS and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
Screen's kind of bad. And how would Iwata have approached the screen? What would the Nintendo ethos be with that? Nintendo goes back so far, and its hardware philosophy goes back so far, that I find myself kind of ruminating on every single decision that would have been made. But I feel pretty confident in saying that there wouldn't have been some kind of video chat thing, which almost feels like something to appease investors. I almost feel like there would have been a more social aspect, which is something that he really appreciated. And that was, I wish we could have had the Miiverse back. I wish we could have
Miiverse is my favorite.
Bring back sharing, game Street Pass, bring back Street Pass, stuff like that. Those kinds of experiences.
Well, and it's actually been kind of interesting for how heavily they promoted the camera component of the Switch 2. I didn't get a chance to ask this when I went to the Switch 2 event in March, when there was a kind of a round table with a bunch of the folks who works on the hardware. And I would have said this in like a nicer way, but like in my heart of hearts is, if you truly wanted to incorporate the camera to have Nintendo represent, this is Nintendo's commentary on the increased social aspect of video games and like how do we find our way in? Well, a coward wouldn't have made you buy an accessory, which thereby means 95% of the audience is never going to engage with these camera experiences, despite the fact that it is included everywhere in your marketing. And like, we're days away from a Mario Party game coming out in which its like chief reason to exist is like mouse control mini games, and then also like, look at all this fun camera stuff you can do. Like, if you truly believed in it, you would have put the camera in the machine in some way and found some way to like really present that as like, this is core to what our pitch is on the Switch 2. We think games are social. And Nintendo always has thought like the social component of video games is a through line through a lot of Nintendo's work. Like, they like people in a room that was obviously part of the big Switch 1 like presentation, because they were orienting it that way very, very obviously. But that is like a lot of my core memories of Nintendo are with other people and like what I was doing with those other people. And so if Nintendo's way in to the modern social experience, in which all these kids have iPads and other tablets and other devices with cameras, well, if that's your way in, buddy, like, put it on the device, because otherwise you're just saying we need something to put in the advertising to show that it's not just the original Switch, when the experience that most people are going to have is the original Switch and maybe voice chat, I guess.
Yeah. The DS Lite had a camera, or the DSi had a camera, if I recall correctly.
Right, the DSi, yes.
And the 3DS had a camera, and
they put a 3D display in a handheld device. Like, and they were crazy in retrospect.
And they were playing around with AR, and I think that really spoke to kind of the experience. So I'm not saying that Nintendo never tried to play around with cutting edge technology. AR was pretty cutting edge in 2011, but it's still kind of is. I just think that he would have gone about it very differently, and I want to be really respectful to Iwata's memory. I also want to be acknowledged that I think he made mistakes. That there were times where the times that Nintendo really tried to be ahead of the curve did actually leave me scratching my head and going, oh, GBA connectivity? Okay, you can lead into that. Sure. Everybody else is going in the direction of online games. Sure. But they knew who they were, I suppose. So,
Donkey Kong Bananza is a game I've played a bunch of. I really like it. I have trouble separating whether it just scratches a bunch of inches or I think it's actually really well designed. And I guess what I mean by that is, something I wanted to ask you about was something that Donkey Kong Bananza got me thinking a lot about was, I think, would you describe Donkey Kong Bananza as a platformer?
Yes. 3D platformer. But there's a heavy amount of, okay, what is a platformer?
Sure.
A platformer's kind of skill-based and often kind of skill-based. I think the final form of the 2D platformer is the Kaizo game, where you just say, what is even going, how do you people do that? What are you doing? What they made, watching Kaizo runs single-handedly made me feel pretty bad about myself in terms of what I used to think I was good at Mario, and now I watch these Kaizo runs and I go, what the heck? But Mario 64, I'm going to go back to Mario 64 because that's my formative experience with 3D platformers. Have always been much more about exploration, collectibles, finding things. And Donkey Kong Bonanza is a very strong expression of that.
It feels like the logical endpoint of like what Mario 64 started, which is to say there's a purity to Mario 64's exploration of that idea of like Mario 64 is often, yes, you're exploring a space to accomplish like a specific objective. You also have a specific objective. Like you're going into a door, you're picking out a star. The level is laid out in a way for you to seek that out, accomplish it. And in doing so, you know, obviously it's rudimentary 3D platforming by the standards of today, but it's you jumping from one space to the next. And what's interesting about Donkey Kong Bonanza is, I love bashing into everything, but there is a mindless quality to it that it's almost like the equivalent of video game white noise. Like, like I just bash into this wall long enough and, ooh, banana. And like I get my little like endorphin treat. And there are certainly times in the game where it asks you to think creatively or to like work through how to accomplish a task. But not that often. You know, like not often enough for what got me into the genre in the first place. I think it's just interesting to look at Astrobot, which I think in terms of pure, like when you say platformer, which is obviously like defining genres is a silly exercise, but I do think it says something about like where we're at with games and philosophical approaches. Like Astrobot takes seriously the term in the genre, platform. Like Astrobot is a game about like navigating platform spaces and like thinking through jump physics and like the little limited mechanics your character has, limited moves you have to accomplish your goal. Whereas Donkey Kong Bonanza, what's interesting about it is it's okay with looking ugly. And I don't mean in the sense that like it has an aesthetic I don't like, but more the amount of times like you bash through things and the game like is clipping like the environment in a really unpolished, like ugly way that I think is like it's a choice. I don't think it's because, oh, like we couldn't find a way to technically solve this. It's a full embrace of the more creative exploratory side that Nintendo's been doing in a lot of its games, especially the Zelda series in the last 10 years, brought over to their evolution of the platformer, which itself has become more, it's almost more of I consider a lot of their platformers more adventure games, and in which the mechanics that express that exploration come from the world of platformers, but the thing that you're doing the most as a player is sort of looking through a space, using more of your brain than your fingers in terms of the relationship between the two. I don't know. Does that make any sense to you?
It sent my brain in a lot of different directions. I think the way that PlayStation and Nintendo are similar and yet contrast one another is so interesting and is really key to understanding the directions that both companies have gone. To me, PlayStation is aesthetic. It is about being cool. Nintendo's guiding philosophy in the 80s was fun. Fun for everyone. Really well-crafted, creative fun, but fun. And PlayStation came and said, we're cool. We're making video games cool. And they did. And I think about
Sega too, right? At least in
Sega
it's American
too.
Marketing. Sega does when Nintendo don't, like the edginess.
Sega was always very technology oriented.
Yeah, that too.
I did a whole story about Rieko Kodama, and I read a lot of interviews, and they talked about making Phantasy Star, and Phantasy Star's original purpose was, we're making Dragon Quest, but it's going to have the Sega flair to it, the Sega touch to it. And what is the Sega touch? Technology. It's going to look amazing. The pixel art's going to be incredible. And then Sega of America, they had their own approach to things that worked very well with the American market at that time, and especially going with sports. PlayStation, last year I went to their 30th anniversary they were showing the new PlayStation, the PS5, with the PS1 kind of 30th anniversary treatment. Yeah. And it was in this very stale room and everything was beautifully set up and people were handling it with white gloves. And I thought, this is so PlayStation right here. Like they're showing off a beautiful classic custom car. And I think a lot of the joy, but also a lot of that aesthetic played into Astro Bot, which was a celebration of PlayStation history. Recently, Nintendo has been very much about a celebration of its own history, celebration, brand building, however you want to describe it. Donkey Kong is a celebration of Donkey Kong history. In almost every respect. Donkey Kong Country fits into there, DK64 comes in there, classic Donkey Kong, period. Mario Odyssey gets kind of a nod. And it is pure chaotic joy with a very strong sense of physical humor. And I think that differing ways that PlayStation and Nintendo approach their individual celebrations of their history in 3D platformers is really telling about the different personalities of these companies. And I think they're both great. I like them both. So, but also returning to my original point, Nintendo is about looking back a lot more than it is about looking forward. It is celebrating itself a lot these days, is what I'm saying.
And that's part of what makes Bananza really interesting, because I don't think there is so much Donkey Kong Country in Donkey Kong Bananza, but it doesn't call itself out.
And that's where the platforming happens, by the way.
It is, yeah, it is.
The DK Country segments, yeah.
But even just like the different, like there are like levels in this game that do very explicit nods to Easter eggs and like different moments in Donkey Kong Country that I found surprising. And I guess what's different about the way Bananza handles it is that it doesn't like stop and then have like a little guy dance and that stuff's fun. Like again, Astro Bot was my favorite game from last year. Really like, really lovely video game. But there's sort of a showy quality to the like history there's more of a museum quality to the celebration that's happening in Astro Bot, whereas in Bananza, it really feels, and I think this is maybe you can speak to this better than me, given your sense of gaming history, but like I have not played a game from Nintendo that feels so reverent to another interpretation of one of its own works. Like Bananza exists because in many ways a love of Donkey Kong Country, which itself was made by Rare, which was reinterpreting one of Nintendo's, like the way we weave through Nintendo's history to arrive at Bananza, which doesn't feel like it's showing reverence to Country because it's like, hey, we got to get in more Donkey Kong references to like get synergy with the company. It really feels like the people who made this game fucking loved Donkey Kong Country, and that was a part of their identity of like what they love about Donkey Kong, and that is weaved into Bananza. And that's very unique to play a Nintendo game that is that reverent to something else in its history, and specifically this one being unique in that Rare made that the game that it's revering.
Truly, Nintendo contains multitudes. I might correct in remembering that DK Bananza has the DK rap, right?
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And if you want to be like mean, it has the DK rap at each one of the sort of homes that you sort of build as like these kind of checkpoints where you can rest in the game. But you can also correct me wrong. Like the DK rap is, referenced in the Mario Brothers movie, but is not actually credited to Grant Kirkhope. And
this game doesn't credit him either.
Well, I just assume I didn't even bother looking that up, because if you're not going to do it in the movie, why would you do it in the game?
Nintendo's crediting practices are different. They only credit one person, basically.
What do you make of that? Like, I know this is a
isn't
complete
it
tangent.
Weird?
It is because it feels very sudden and petty. Like petty is the word I would use, but I don't know if I should ascribe maliciousness to it. But do you ascribe maliciousness to it? Or is this just, a different version of Nintendo does a confusing thing and doesn't want to explain why?
I think that Nintendo wants the focus to be on Nintendo and not individual developers, which brings me back to the earliest days of video games when developers had to sneak their actual names into the game because there was a prohibition on crediting. And
it was also like tradition, like people would put like their the first letter of their first name, period, and then their last name, and then so they wouldn't list their full name. Part of that was like to stop like poaching of different like developers and stuff like that, right? So you just wouldn't know who was the talent behind whatever game was successful that month.
Yeah, Nintendo's gotten really cagey about which developer is working on which game, and the community has turned it into almost an Easter egg hunt. Reading between the lines, we've determined that this game was probably developed by EAD, or which team worked on this one. And then Nintendo finally reveals it, and everybody goes, "Oh, wow!" Or remember when there was a whole hunt to find out who was going to be, what was it, the new voice of Mario?
Yeah.
And I remember my reporter, Reb Valentine, had narrowed it down to like 3 different people, and everybody was trying to figure it out. Nintendo was going, "We're not going to tell you." And it's like, come on.
What's so odd, because I remember with Donkey Kong specifically, I think early on when they were not crediting folks, the thought was like, oh, are they trying to, is like a quote lesser team working on this, where like if you found out who was making this, your expectations would change. And part of the shell game they're playing is, well, we just won't tell you who it is. Thus, I guess maybe you might judge the game more on its merits than on the team. But like Bananza was so odd because I remember seeing some theories that maybe who's the Luigi's Mansion team? I forget, the Canadian.
I'm sorry, I don't remember.
Mansion developer.
I guess I'm a fraud.
No.
Nintendo fraud here.
Why? I'll find. Next Level.
Next Level. Okay.
Haven't heard from them in a while, so people were like, well, maybe they would be the ones like tasked with making a Donkey Kong game. Like, as people are trying to piece together who might have worked on it. It's like, oh, that's a big ambitious step up, but like, okay, Nintendo's, trust them with Luigi's Mansion. Maybe they would also trust them with like a character they're trying to rebuild from the ground up in the mainstream consciousness, and then that's lower stakes than tasking them with a Mario game. Well, no, then it turns out like, no, it's like many of the core team that made Super Mario Odyssey, the kind of thing that you think you would want to brag about. Like, hey, I know that we haven't made a Donkey Kong game in a long time like this, but the reason you should be excited is, maybe you're sort of meh on it being a Donkey Kong game, but like, didn't you like Super Mario Odyssey? Wouldn't you want to play a game from that team? Yes, I would. And that those trailers did a lot of work. Like the marketing for that game after its announcement, I think, went a long way towards selling me on what was interesting about it. But it's just so odd for them to hold back on something like that, because I think for a lot of their core audience, that would have been a huge selling point of just like, yeah, of course I would want to play a new game from the developers of Mario Odyssey. But all that sanding down, that is also something that gives me worries about the future. The sort of like turning Nintendo into a, like once Miyamoto and others like exit stage left for whatever reason, is the goal of Nintendo's future like to not have like a public identity other than the products that come out of it? Which, if you make the Disney comparison, I guess that's a lot of what Disney does these days. But boy, it would bum me out if you didn't have faces to associate, personalities to associate with Nintendo, because I feel that's a huge part of what gave them their identity during the Reggie, Miyamoto, Iwata era.
Yeah, we're not going to have any more puppets.
No, I think not.
Alas. I think Nintendo wants to be viewed almost as like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory, a place of wonders that is producing these delightful experiences. Do not look behind the curtain. You do not need to know what is going on behind the scenes at Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. Just enjoy the experience. And I think also Nintendo wants to be many things, and one of the things I think they want to be is a lifestyle brand. I do not think they necessarily want to be seen as a video game company. I think they want to be seen as something more than that. And I was thinking about that a lot when I went to the Nintendo store in San Francisco, which just opened. It's, I believe, the second one in North America. They opened it over here in SF, and I was like, why did they do that? And I think it's because the amusement park's down in Los Angeles. And I was walking around, I was looking at the different characters, I was looking at the merch and how everything was arranged, and I was thinking about how they're taking off after more and more after Pokemon, which itself has become a lifestyle brand, where the video games themselves are only one sort of small part in service of selling a lot of cookery and statues and shirts and blankets and the kind of thing you would find in Bed Bath and Beyond, but with Pokemon or Nintendo characters. And Nintendo is kind of trending in that direction. And video games are still a big part of what they do, but I do not know if they necessarily care about giving credit to the people who are crafting them. And I think that's too bad.
Yeah, I agree. It does seem like one thing you're touching on there between Nintendo as a lifestyle brand, and I think what Donkey Kong Bonanza and actually kind of a design philosophy that runs through Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, is Nintendo trying to figure out, like, lifestyle brand, I think, is trying to find their equivalent of, like, Disney adults, right? Like, how does Nintendo become part of your identity, like, past, not just as, like, a casual hobby, but, like, as a broader part of, like...
Am I a Nintendo adult? Oh, my gosh. Oh, you got me. I'm like, I'm not a Disney adult. No, I'm a Nintendo adult. That's worse.
There's not even that, at least Disney got more things to... There's like a whole park to go to. Like,
well, they got a park now. I can go to that. It's a small park. It's growing.
But I do think I think it's like how do they sort of ingratiate themselves into different parts of your life so they can be kind of like part of your kind of personal cultural identity as you get older, and then in theory pass that down to like your children, like for example. And then I think what's interesting about Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Donkey Kong Bonanza, I don't know how much of this is intentional or them stumbling into this or what have you, but I've had a running theory looking at like those three games that, if you look at like some of the design trends that are happening, like with Roblox and things like that, where like I look at my children, a lot of the games they play do not have objectives, or they're like very loose. It's more like games with a framework. And then again, that's where like on Roblox, it's social first, like gameplay mechanics second, or the mechanics are in service of the social. And it's not really about like completing a specific objective, building up a set of skills. It's more about being in sort of a virtual playground, doing kind of your own storytelling. And there is something interesting about Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, Donkey Kong Bonanza that do feel like they're playing in that space. I mean, those games have objectives, they have frameworks, but you could play Breath of the Wild, Tears of the Kingdom, and like I'm sure people who are like, well, I never got to Ganon. Like I just screwed around in the world for 100 hours, and that was a satisfying experience, which is not how you would normally describe playing. Like, plenty of people start a video game and don't finish it, but what they're describing is something fundamentally different, which is I started a game, I did finish it. I just sort of finished my time with it, not because I got bored or like couldn't beat it, but because I had a satisfying arc with the game that felt like it came to a natural conclusion, and that conclusion did not involve hitting the credits, like rescuing the princess, like doing the typical things we associate with the arc of starting and finishing a video game. And I think Bonanza is interesting because what my 8-year-old did with it was get to the first world with me, take the Joy-Cons, and then start building tunnels. Like she built a whole network infrastructure. Occasionally she ran into bananas, and then her and her sister would go, "Oh, banana." But that was incidental. Those were just things that she did along the way to building a network of tunnels where she was like building out rooms, and she was like, "That's my room, that's my sister's room." And that's what she did in the game.
Cute.
And the game like supports that, right? Like, I mean, that's maybe just a byproduct of them doing the destructibility and the voxels, but she had a wonderful time screwing around with that for about 45 minutes and then was like, "Okay, I'm done." And what did she actually complete in that time? Like absolutely nothing by the traditional standards of spending an hour with a video game. And so I wonder if you see anything in kind of their design approach that you, I don't know, have noticed that maybe feels like them playing with, like, what even does it mean for Nintendo to make a game for younger or just like broad audiences when you have these like live service, platform style game, forever style games? Like, how does Nintendo even fit into a world like that?
Oh, it's funny when you were saying that, the thought that popped into my head was Nintendo is still a toy company. That is their history. That is their roots. They were playing cards, and then there were toys, and they treated Nintendo video games sort of as toys that you could play with. And DK Bonanza, I guess, is in that sense, it's a little bit of a toy. You're going into the sandbox, and you're yes, there's a objective to this game. Sure, I'm building my tunnel, and I'm gonna sit in my tunnel, and there's my sister's room over there. I love that, actually. So if I think that DNA is still there for Nintendo, and it's the reason that we got things like Malabo back in the day and things like that. Every time I think, oh, Nintendo doesn't fit into the modern world, I don't know what they're going to do. This is the last time I thought this was with phones. They've surprised me. And Nintendo's successfully existed in a world of Minecraft for 15 years now and continue to coexist with it. So I think it's just different. I also think that in some ways, let's see. You're a parent.
Mm-hmm.
Your kids mostly play Switch, right? Because it's an accessible, kid-friendly system. No,
they don't. No,
I know.
They mostly they are they prefer the world of a tablet, and like these are kids who have access to every video game they could ever want, right? Due to my job. I sometimes wonder if that worked against them, which is like they just take video games for granted because I'm always playing them and they're around, so it sort of like becomes part of the air in a way that's different. I don't know, but I see most kids like Switch is the way I would describe it with young people these days in broad strokes is video games are not special to them. Video games are a thing they could do amongst many things they could do, and the devices in which they are interacting with them on allow them to jump between interests and feelings and impulses within a moment's notice, which is different than like what you do when you switch down or when you sit down to play a Switch, which is switch down. That's my new newsletter. You're sitting down to play a video game. Like it's when you load up a tablet, my daughters could do one of many different things. When when I was younger at their age, well, if I'm sitting down with a device, it's like I'm putting a cartridge in to play this video game. And so there are lots of young kids who are into video games, but I think that's where it goes beyond a casual interest with like they're a video game fan. My kids like video games, but it is passing relative to how I would describe it for like a lot of kids when I was growing up.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've seen data from various places that suggests that kids have a very, very different relationship with consoles in particular compared to people who are, say, over 25 or over 30. Kids who are teenagers now just really do not care about consoles as a cohort. And I think a lot of companies have this internal data and are thinking, it might be explaining why Xbox started doing the this is not an Xbox, this is an Xbox thing, or Xbox everywhere sort of approach. I have several young nephews and nieces, and their gaming habits vary quite widely, I think. Some of them do play Switch, and I know many parents who primarily play Switch as a family thing with their kids. It's like, I am going to play with my kid. We're going to go play some game together, some Lego game, for example. We're going to play that together. My niece was grinding dinosaurs in Lego Jurassic Park for her 5-year-old, and it was very cute. And they were mainly playing Nintendo Switch. I agree with you that Nintendo has always managed to find a niche as a very family-friendly platform that is really good for kids, and that niche has changed a lot over the years and is continuing to change. And Nintendo's audience might be aging up a bit, and maybe that might explain why they're going so heavily on a nostalgia angle, that maybe the kind of people who are into Nintendo are no longer kids, but people who are 30 and up.
I have not been able to investigate this by asking Nintendo directly too many times, but this is something I've learned over the 2 years of writing Crossplay and like really thinking about their games through the lens of my kids. They are a like all ages, family friendly company. I don't think they spend meaningful time focus testing their games with children, understanding how kids play games. I think that's reflective of their broader philosophy, which is how they make things in general. And like in many ways, that's really good. One small like example where it's bad and frustrating, like for example in Mario Brothers Wonder, which is one of the first times where the company they have these assist modes. Nintendo doesn't do accessibility. They don't do game options like, do you want to just turn off the damage and just like play? Like they don't do stuff like that. They are still very discreet, handcrafted experiences, and they will begrudgingly add in a couple of knobs you can turn. Well,
isn't that funny to think about for a company like Nintendo?
So Mario Brothers Wonder was like where it really crystallized for me was that game came out 2 years ago. So that means my 8-year-old is 6 and my 5-year-old is 3. And my 3-year-old at the time barely understands the constructs of controller. Mostly just wants to like hold it to be like part of the family fun. But her favorite character, like many like young girls, is Princess Peach. And there are two things that happen in Wonder. One, there's not a standardized practice across Nintendo teams on whether you can be the same character in a video game. Mario Kart, everyone can be Peach. Smash Brothers, everyone can be Peach. Mario Brothers Wonder, everyone cannot be Peach. Like, you must pick another character. So that caused a lot of issues. And I was like, if they sat down with like a family of like daughters, like they would immediately realize that, like you're causing fights amongst like siblings as a result of this choice. And then 2, the 3-year-old can't handle jumping, running, like just wants to be able to hit the jump button and like be present. And the only way for them to be present and to participate with the family is to play as Nabbit, to play as this ugly little side character who nobody knows and nobody wants to be. And I know that Nintendo is not intentionally like making fun of my 3-year-old by like forcing them to play as Nabbit, but that was the emotional response she had, was like, I should feel bad because I'm not good at this game and I have to play as Nabbit and I can't play as the character that I really like. And if they were a company that truly understood kids and wanted to make like games for like really young people, like that wouldn't be something present in their games, which I think speaks to exactly what you're saying, which is I think this is a company that is aging up. And part of the push into movies and theme parks is, I think, probably not wrong, but an understanding that you can't take for granted the generational passing on of an appreciation for these characters and these brands. And it might not happen through video games. So if it's not going to happen through video games, maybe it can happen through a movie, maybe it can happen through a theme park, maybe it can happen through somewhere else. As I think we look back like this moment in time with the Switch 2, with Iwata having passed, with Miyamoto in sort of the twilight of his career at the company, I think it's a company looking back a little bit worried about what it even means to look forward. So I think they're hoping to look back so that takes care of the forward part. And then it's just kind of an open question on whether that's where the company is, in 10 years.
They're also a very our way or the highway company. There's like, we have crafted the experience around this approach. You do not get to take control of that experience yourself. This is our experience that we've crafted for you to experience. And people are having that with Mario Kart, actually. There was a whole, I don't want to call it a scandal, but a little bit of a blow up in the community recently because they really want to play traditional Mario Kart races. 3 laps, the way that Mario Kart is, and Nintendo patched out the workaround, or at least made it more annoying to get to.
Right. Which
caused a whole kind of a blow up in the community. And people were like, why does Nintendo have to be like this? Just give us our 3-lap races, for heaven's sake. And Nintendo would be like, no.
Yeah, and I think and that lines neatly up with the Princess Peach sort of issue. It's like, why can't they both be the same character? Because they can't.
There's only one Princess Peach.
So they want Princess Peach.
They have this almost their own logic.
Smash Brothers, it's frustrating, and it's also why I love the company. Like, I think the kind of the quirks of the company and why I get so frustrated are also, I think, part of what makes it.
Quirk is a very generous way of
putting it. It's a very generous way of putting it, but it's, I guess, I don't know. Given the way I feel about the other companies, the other major players in the industry, I guess I'm more interested in being frustrated with those quirks than some of the other what I would call quirks at these other companies. So
Annoying versus malicious, sure.
I think so. Yes, I think that is.
Yeah.
Given the state of 2025 and what we're in, I think I might take annoying over.
Charmingly
malicious.
annoying.
Charmingly annoying.
That's the high point of what you're gonna get. Speaking of charmingly annoying, or maybe just annoying, I want your take on something.
Hit me.
What do you think of game keycards?
So there, personally, it does not impact me because I more or less moved to physical or to digital like ages ago. The only thing I collect physically is horror Blu-rays and 4Ks, and everything else is just on a device. It strikes me as I can't speak to the manufacturing process. I'm like, maybe there are things I'm unaware of. It feels very cheap. Like it just feels. It feels like this has strong echoes of Nintendo's stranglehold over the cartridges, like back in the NES days, in which
Getting back to its roots.
It really does. Like it's sort of like hand waving whatever the actual explanations are, just vibes based. It feels like Nintendo exerting an enormous amount of control over a manufacturing process that is reaping disastrous consequences for like historical preservation and all sorts of other problems. I have a feeling that you have extremely strong thoughts on game key cards.
Oh yeah, I went off on it a little bit on Jeff Grubb's show, and I kind of stepped back on it, and I was like, geez, I really went off on it. And I think some of it is just my own experience, which is when I bought a Switch 2, it gave me the option to transfer everything over, but I was worried about transferring everything over because I have a very, very large Animal Crossing island that I don't want to lose. And I have a lot of Pokemon that I don't want to mess up.
Mm-hmm.
Pokemon that go back to like 2003. I'm not joking. And so I get leery about transferring over everything and then going, oh, you messed up. Sorry, that's all gone now. And I know that and the documentation is not very good because Nintendo and the internet is singularly unhelpful and full of misinformation these days. So I decided to just fire up the Switch 2 and download things from the cloud individually, which is fine, except I have to have my old Switch connected to the internet, and then I have to put every game key card into the Switch 2, as if I'm taking every cartridge and going boop, 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 boop. And I only did some of them, but my Switch is somewhere now, and I think it's run out of battery. Mm-hmm. And if it's not connected to the internet, it will not let me connect my game key cards over. So what if my Switch just goes away? There was this one time a couple years ago where I forgot my Switch at the airport in the TSA area. And thank God I got it back in the lost and found. It saved me a lot of time in Tears of the Kingdom, saved my Pokemon, saved my Animal Crossing island, etc. So many other companies have been like, yeah, just download it off the cloud. Nintendo's like, no, you must just move this cartridge from a system that has to be connected to the internet into your... And it's so... I don't like it. It's very Nintendo. I wish they would just let me download things off the cloud, but Nintendo's not going to do that. They're not going to do that.
They're not going to do that. And I think there's many other things we could say about the company, but I think we're going to call it there. I knew that if I got us rolling that we could go for much longer, but I said I'd keep you for an hour, and I want to uphold that because you have a lot else going on.
I do.
What else you got going on that you want to tell
people?
Well,
aside from Nintenkats and Axe of the Blood God, I am going to San Diego Comic-Con on behalf of Restart.Run. And I'm with a lot of my old pals. I'm with Stella, and I'm with Nars, and Ben Watts will be there, and lots of my old friends from previously of IGN. And we're going to make a show. And it's going to be on Vertical Video. It's going to be on YouTube. And we're just going to be vibing with the show. We're going to be checking out the Magic the Gathering Spider-Man reveal. And we're going to be checking out the new Scott Pilgrim game. And we'll be doing live reacts to all of the big news. And go check it out on Restart's YouTube channel. and all of their social channels. So it'll be around. You'll have a good time. I'm sure you'll catch our soon-to-be viral reels. So,
Well, that's excellent, and I know you're very busy getting all that together, and I appreciate you coming through to chat with me about Nintendo. This was a really interesting conversation. It's kind of I'm hoping to like put a stake in the ground and like something that I could do, about these companies, like once a year or something like that. So we'll have to have you back through soon, and probably we're gonna have you through to talk about the NFL in a month and
yes.
change. We'll be close to the start of the season, so I'm sure you'll be hearing from.
Are you gonna do a preview of all 32 teams? Because I'll do the Vikings preview.
That would
Just
be
find
super
someone
good.
I bet you could find someone in the games industry to rep every single team.
I love that idea. If we could just, who would be the?
I have a Niners fan. It's our old pal Sterling
Who's a
McGarvey.
Dolphins fan? Who's a Miami Dolphins fan?
Oh gosh. Oh, they're around.
I'll just get Chia. Chia was Chia grew up in Florida. Like our producer, doesn't technically is a Baltimore Ravens fan. I forget why.
Aram Jabari's the lone Chargers fan.
There you
from
go.
PlayStation. Get him on.
All right,
Wesley Inpool from IGN, New York Giants fan.
Okay, we're building.
Schreier's the Jets fan.
We're building our list. We're building our list.
I've already built your list for you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, hopefully we'll have you back on to talk some sports. Thank you to everyone for listening. This episode was produced by Chia Contreras, and our thanks to Tumelo for the Remap Radio theme. You can follow more of Tumelo's work at tumelo.net. You can support everything we do, once again, by heading to remapradio.com. Please rate and review the podcast if you have a moment. We'll be back later this week with Remap Radio. Until then, fuck capitalism. Go home.